Okay, well, it's 3 o'clock, so I'm going to kick things off here. Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Wright, and I'd like to welcome you to the launch of three new books from Muse Press and Galaxy Press: Wolf Trees by Katie Hartsock, Advocatus Diaboli by William Baer, and Imaginary Sonnets by Daniel Galef. As well as serving as an associate fiction editor for Muse Press, my poetry collection Last Wishes was published by Muse in 2021. All the books featured today are available online from the ablemuse.com bookstore, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. I'll start today's program in a moment, but first I'd like to tell you how I'd like to proceed. I'll introduce each reader with a short biography, then mute everyone but the reader for the length of the reading, 20 to 30 minutes. I ask that you show your appreciation for any individual poems with silent applause or make comments in the chat box. At the conclusion of each reader's presentation, please feel free to unmute yourselves for general applause. But I ask that any comments or questions be saved for the discussion period at the end of the program. There will be no break. We'll begin the program in a moment. First, I'd like to introduce you to the man we have to thank for publishing this trio of new books from these extraordinary writers and for all he has given to the art of poetry and letters, Alexander Pepple. Alexander.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you all for coming up this afternoon for what should be another great afternoon of reading from Bill, Katie, and Daniel. As Rob just mentioned, they all have new books that have just recently been fully released or almost to be released. And so I'll start by showing some of the books we have recently released. This is one from one of the participants who is not a participant here, but this is a book from Stephen Gibson. This is our latest book just released, and it's a full, this is the hardcover version, and it's a full color, and it's called Frida Kahlo in Fort Lauderdale. And as you can see, it's a full color book. I don't know if you can see anything actually. So this is the hardcover, and this is the paperback version. So congratulations, Stephen.
And thank you, Alex.
There is Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It looks terrific.
Yeah. And we'll also have from Bill, William Baer, two recent books just released from Muse Press. The first one is Advocatus Diaboli that Rob just mentioned. And this is actually from the series we call the Catholic Themes. And also from Bill, recently released, we have this, which is Murder in Times Square. And this is another series of Bill's, which is the Daedra mystery novels. And as you can see, Bill is quite a prolific writer, and he has a few novels with us already. Congratulations, Bill. And we move on to Katie. Katie has a book about trees, as Rob was mentioning, and this is Wolf Trees from Katie, and this is going to be full release next month. So congratulations, Katie. And finally, last but not least, we have, although it's the smallest book of the bunch, this is from Daniel, Imaginary Sonnets. And this is Daniel showing his sonneteer prowess with all kinds of persona poems and sonnets. So these are, I'm sure most of the readers will be reading from their new books, or maybe from other books of theirs. It's up to them. And up to Rob's, who is running the program. And I also have to remind everyone that I have links posted in the chat about the readers' web pages, and also set Able Muse links. And I encourage everyone to support the readers by getting their books from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever books are sold, or from Able Muse Press itself. And I also have to remind everyone that the new issue of Able Muse Review, the journal, is coming out year end. So this is a good chance to subscribe to it. And besides subscribing and receiving the paper version of the book when it's published, you also have access to all the digital issues online as a subscriber. So without further ado, I have to pass it on now to Rob, who has been very graciously hosting this event a few times already, and I'm sure he's going to do a great job. So take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Alex. And I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that Alexander Pepple, as well as being our host today or bringing these books to us today, founded and edits Able Muse Press and Able Muse, and also founded and directed the Erratosphere, the online workshop, which I suggest you check out. It's a wonderful resource. His poetry and prose have been published in Barrow Street, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Chronicle, Think Journal, Euphony, Per Contra, La Zan, San Pedro River Review, and elsewhere. And he edits the Able Muse anthology, Able Muse 2010. Thanks so much, Alexander, for everything you do. And now I'll introduce our first reader, which is Katie Hartsock. She's the author of 2 poetry collections, Wolf Trees 2023 and Bed of Impatience 2016, both published by Able Muse. Her poems appear widely in such journals as Ecotone, Poetry, Kenyon Review, 32 Poems, the 3-Penny Review, Image, Plume, Dapple Things, The New Criterion, Beloit Poetry Journal. She holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Michigan, where she won the Major Hopwood Award and a PhD in comparative literature from Northwestern University. Her current manuscripts in progress include The Last Crusade, a poetry collection containing, yes, a few Indiana Jones poems, and Iliad Rewilded, a hybrid text combining translations with vignettes of the epic's ancient audiences and creative commentary. She's an associate professor of English and creative writing at Oakland University in Michigan. She lives in Ann Arbor with her husband and her young sons. Today, she will be reading from her new poetry collection, Wolf Trees. Please welcome Katie.
Thank you so much, Rob, and thank you so much, Alex, for everything you do for Able Muse authors and for contemporary poetry. It's so lovely to be here today, and I'm so happy to read with Bill and Daniel. And it's so nice to see so many friends and family in the audience here. So thank you so much for being here. I am excited to read from Wolf Trees. I think I will start with just the first poem in the book, which is kind of a fast ode to its topic. The title, Breast Milk. The eyes wide or weighty with it, the full boat or low tide of it, the leopard of it when it leaps. Nervous before a sermon, Saint Bernard prayed for help, and the Virgin appeared, babe in lap, to squirt him in the eye with a luscious stream of it, thus gifting him with eloquence. The sun-white glow of it in dimmed-down rooms across galaxies, galaxies, galaxies. The Romans admired a mother who visited her father, sentenced to starve to death in prison, and kept him alive with it, secretly, the leopard of it when it leaps. 10 children my great-grandmother nursed from one breast, the other side never made, maybe, a country doctor thought, because of her childhood polio. The creation ex nihilo of it, across the galaxy's pale cream. In a short story by Maupassant, a train is stopped far from anywhere, and one car holds 2 strangers, a very hungry man and a nursemaid, painfully engorged. And that's all you really need to know, except it occurs to me she must have been hungry too. So that's the first poem in the book, and motherhood and nursing, and those are all kind of constant themes throughout the book. And that will all become wrapped up in the title sequence, which I'll read a little bit from soon, with the fact that I live with type 1 diabetes. I was a late onset diagnosis when I was 26, and it took me a long time to write about it because it was just such an immense change in my life. But gradually I did start to write about it. And I have a couple presents for you that I'm going to put in the chat. The first one, if you were ever curious about the Virgin Mary squirting a priest in the face with breast milk, that did exist as a story, and I put a link in the chat to a beautiful image of it, if you're curious. The next poem I'm going to read has to do with my living with type 1 diabetes, and also the period of my life when we were hoping for children. And the part of this poem, which is called Studies in Devotion, it has ekphrastic description of Raphael's Madonna di Foligno. So if you would like to look at that while I read it, I put that in the chat too. So this is called Studies in Devotion. He reaches for my insulin pump, the size of a strawberry, under my sleeve. He thinks it's me, the programmed opaque reservoir that feeds my blood in drips. Expecting it to yield like skin to his touch, he outlines the hard edges until enough is known for now. We shift into the pose of mother and slippery child in Raphael's Madonna di Foligno, the painting a doctor prescribed to me. Not for Jerome or his lion, not for Francis's hands, like winter branches singing to faraway shapes. Not for John the Baptist, his Rod Stewart hair and wiry biceps, and not for the woman or the babe who squirms to sail out of his arms, her arms. My doctor, she was very good, directed my gaze to the children's faces surrounding Mary. They have become the clouds they float inside. Some look at her and some look at each other. Some have been reading James Wright and cupped their sister's cheeks. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness. Others prefer Leonard Cohen. They are leaning out for love, and they will lean that way forever. Look at them for a long time, a little each day, my doctor instructed. And I did, holding a screen in my lap in a Chicago flat. The man who commissioned the work kneels below them, caped in fur-lined red. Something fiery fell from the sky and into his house, but he lived. Paint me alone among the saints. Paint me in my gratitude. This happened years ago. On earth they gather around the ground torn open by the disaster, a womb of nothingness that filled, healed shut, and now these green and yellow tufts grow there, as if dormant seeds were harrowed back to life. And in the middle, across his messenger's chest, a cherub holds a bronze blank plaque, still waiting for its words, the way the uninscribed can wait. And if you're a fan of James Wright or Leonard Cohen, you might recognize lines from their poems and Leonard Cohen's song, Suzanne, in that poem. And if you're interested, you know, that painting is really interesting because most people think it was a meteor that fell from the sky, and it's depicted in the background as what the Monsignor who survived it existed. But some people also think of it as a UFO, and it's like part of like weird UFO Renaissance conspiracies. So there's a rabbit hole for you if you would like to go after it. Another element of Wolf Trees is I use a lot of classical references. I teach mythology, and that's one of my favorite parts of my job. And I often show ancient artwork. And there's this one kind of ancient Greek drinking cup that I love, and it's called an eye cup. And it's because you would hold this rather large cup by its handles, and painted on the front of the cup would be a pair of eyes, very large eyes. And as you drank your wine and like gradually finished it, the bottom of the cup would reveal a face. And I don't know if you've ever known anyone who became someone else when they were drinking, but I think that's a really subtle way of, relating to that. So I wanted to write a poem about that, beautiful cup. And I guess it's kind of an anonymous persona poem from someone in antiquity who's watching someone drink out of such a cup. And it's called I cup. E-Y-E, I cup, but also I. Anyway, an ancient Greek drinking vessel with a face, usually with prominent eyes underneath. Draining it, you lift a mask, a satyr, a monster, a brighter-eyed man painted on the bottom of your kylix. The foot of its stem is the cartoonish nose, and its handles rounded ears. You finger grip so you can wear your new face. And everyone laughs as you shoulder sway, drink the last few drops, let some dribble down your neck from a head not quite connected. The streak runs red and then pale red. But I know you best in the early sips, when the cup's eyes just cover your mouth. You look at me with 4 ways of looking, and someone else who's also you drifts in the lees. The title sequence of Wolf Trees is part 2 of the book, and it's an 11-part sequence that alternates lineated verse and prose poetry. I am not going to read all 11 parts of the sequence, but I will read some of them. And if you've never heard of a wolf tree, I think what I read will kind of give you an idea more of how people define wolf trees. The definition varies across the US. Some people think of it as a tree that is left in a farmland that is left as a shade tree for animals after everything else was razed to make way for the farm. So it's that single kind of drastic silhouette on the horizon. Other definitions of it include such a tree that a new forest has grown around so that it looks much, much older than its surrounding forest. And either case, it's a remnant of a former ecology. And, when I first heard the phrase wolf trees, that is what unlocked my writing about diabetes, because I was sort of constantly plagued that I had this disease that had killed so many people before the invention of artificial insulin. And so that's sort of where my writing about wolf trees, or my writing about the diabetes, started coming through, and all through thinking about wolf trees and survival and remnants. So I'll read just a few sections of the title poem. Wolf Trees 1. I cut down a forest and left one tree. I put to pasture the berry-eyed beasts who could lie with horseflies in its shade. And I spread its acorned branches outward and upward into what would be a telltale shape, a crown without hindrance, a Vitruvian man risen out of the ground at his groin and stretching all of his arms to their fullest circumferences. I changed my mind, let the farms fail and trees swarm back over the land, a forest again. I watched saplings try to find a way up around the oak, a behemoth over all the new growth, a mouth continuing to drink its accustomed jugs of sun and rain, a gnarled bouquet. I called it a wolf tree. 3. Bring me the broad-chested earth. A wolf in the forest stands a remnant of the field where it spread wide and high, the field where it stood a remnant of a raised forest. Wolf trees, perhaps, because when the forest came back, they preyed on the growth of new timber in a forester's logic where prohibitive becomes predatory. Or because they should be, like wolves, eradicated, as the early 20th century manuals advised. Avaricious flora, unfit for life. But some say a wolf, because the trees stand alone, looming above new diminutive woods, apart from their packs that fell to long ago axes, apart from the old familial milky scents. And somewhere I read the suggestion, a wolf, owing to the size of these trees, which cast such shadows where wolves can hide. 4. When I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I was 26 years old, and my first thought was, do I have to stop drinking beer? When I was 20 and mugged at gunpoint on a 2 a.m. front porch of a sloping Cincinnati street, I said to the half-masked man demanding my purse, "Let me get my cigarettes." When I was diagnosed, I did not know my body, grown thin, had been starving. I thought I looked fantastic, even in my exceptional thirst and exhaustion. Diabetes, from the ancient Greek for sieve, because untreated, it does not let you process nutrients. You just piss everything out, hence thirst as a telltale symptom. A disease of great antiquity. When I peed on holy cliffs over the Aegean or floodplains by the fertile Nile thousands of years ago, doctors noted the bees and ants that flocked to the puddle. One took a sample to taste my flushed out sugars, hence the name diabetes mellitus, a sieve, a sweet one. The first diabetic in the United States to receive a new drug from Toronto was James D. Havens, the future woodcut artist. It was 1922, and he was 22 and about to die. But in blood, doctors had found the right islands, insula in Latin, hence insulin, to extract and inject, mimicking a pancreas. Havens' Wikipedia entry shows him holding one of his children and describes his body of work as trying to, quote, depict the dynamic but often unseen processes of nature. Being a good diabetic is lonely work. I stand in the middle of a field. I stand in the middle of the forest, watching others eat and run and cook and walk down all the well-stocked, shining aisles and never check their numbers. The numbers change so fast. Sometimes I see another silhouette like mine, chiseling its life into the sky, one more day. I see its reaching branches. I know the reach without touch. A century ago, I'd never have got to the age I am now. Decades ago, my body would have been sternly advised against bearing my sons. A wolf tree in a pasture or forest or suburban street where New Englanders or Midwesterners or Pacific coasters use the term. In Britain, they say legacy trees or veteran trees. Looks around and thinks, what do they mean, a wolf? And why do I recognize nothing from my youth? And why was I not cut down like the rest? Thank you. I am going to switch. It would be, if you wanted to continue reading the sequence, it is here in this book. And I just want to say, I mentioned James D. Havens as the first American who received insulin as a life-saving medicine, and he went on to become an artist. I'm so honored. This is his woodcut from 1936, and it's called Daydream, and it's looking up through the branches of the wide spreading branches of a tree. And I was just so grateful to the Havens family for giving us permission to use it, and to Alex for his gorgeous design, incorporating it. And also it's kind of amazing that it's around the 100th anniversary of, he had that medicine in 1922, and it changed the world for so many people. So it's one of my favorite parts of this book is the cover. Switching now to diaper rash. I have 2 sons, and we are very blessed with 2 sons. And when I was taking care of our youngest son after he was a newborn, he got the worst diaper rash, ever. And it reduced me to almost nothingness. And so I had to write a poem about it. This poem also contains a PSA for anyone who has small children or grandchildren or friends with small children. If they ever have a bad diaper rash, go get Maalox, the liquid antacid, and just spread it on that little bum. And it's like magic. It took 3 weeks for me to find this out because nobody would tell me this really simple trick. But tell the world about Maalox and diaper rash, please. Okay, this is the rash, and something I like to do is go back to ancient texts and kind of play around within them. And so this references Dante's Inferno, whereas many of us know the eternal punishments are described as Dante is guided through by Virgil, the Roman poet. And I felt like I was in the Inferno with this diaper rash. So this is how I began the poem. The rash. Like a criminal, it had its reasons and eluded understanding for far too long. Antibiotics and a dairy and soy intolerance made the baby's stool so frequent and acidic it burned his flesh, just the same as flames would have burned. The doctor used words like corrosive and caustic. Bent over him weeping, I thought we made a scene somehow left out of the Inferno. The man whose midlife crisis knocked him down to hell's own gastric acid, and his guide, a poet from 2000 Roman years ago, whose tomb Italian teenagers still get arrested for breaking into to get it on. Descend a hill tapestried with fire to a field like a blistered hide where hiss the bile ponds and their runoff streams of scum that excoriate whatever they touch. Now they see me, wilted over the changing table at the mouth of my fountainless cave, my grief a record skipping beneath its needle. As soon as I get a new diaper on, the child shits and shrieks again. And clear-complexioned goblins see to it that my diaper stash and all the stuff I marshal to protect his skin, Maalox, calmoseptine, aloe vera, Vaseline, topped with cornstarch, remain eternally replenished. Dante asks, "Oh, mother, with your bird's nest hair and crooked back, what have you done to earn your place in these?" And then he still talks for a while. They wait for my reply, the red depths of my monologue. While they watch me fold the diaper, the wickedly necessary diaper, I speak briefly about tenderness. And I'm going to read from the end of the book now. This is, there's a lot of wolf tree poems that are not in the sequence, and there's a lot of trees that are not in the wolf tree poems. And this is an example of one. This is a kind of a love poem to various things, including my husband. And it is a double sonnet, except that the first final couplet is only one line. So if you can kind of see how that works. And I didn't know what to call it. And we had just moved to Michigan. And my husband said, "Oh, you should call it Wolverine." And I was like, "Right. Yes, Wolverine." And as you know, Wolverine is the mascot of University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, but also the state animal. So Wolverine. Lord, I love your trees. I've loved them early, on walks to lower my blood sugar before I nurse the baby with this broken body given me, which can live in the time you gave me form and blood, this time on earth that gives us robots full of math and insulin. I call the little one Elf, my helper. Lord, when the sky looks hard enough to drop and break, I will love your trees, stunned but not surprised by rain. I know your clouds from above too, because we fly in planes in this time you gave me. Lord, I am stumbling, bowed with a beer in the backyard as the dusk spreads its bouquets within your trees, dark as the Iron Age. Lord, I love the lights in the front yard of a house just 1 block north of us, yellow globes of light, prismated with a solar-powered look. If my husband walked through their glow right now, right through the glowing space they make between houses, I would recognize his shoulders and his gait, the contours of his face, his clean-shaven jaw, or even trimmed beard. My 2 husbands, I call him who changes and stays. Thanks to change, maybe we stay. Years ago, after I'd said yes, we kept on talking. Marriage, we thought, is like a sonnet. The content craves the form, which must mean more than fixity and innovate like a leaf. Lord, I love your trees. Um, this next poem goes back to the idea of nursing. One of my favorite things in the world is the Homer's Iliad, and I always love to teach, especially, well, so many parts of it, but especially Book 18's description of the shield of Achilles, which Hephaestus makes for Thetis, so Achilles can have new armor to go back into battle. And I show my students Auden's Shield of Achilles, and we talk about how it changes. And so it's on my mind a lot. And when I was having trouble nursing my older son, my firstborn, I was given something to help, and it was called a nipple shield. And my brain immediately, it was like the nipple shield of Achilles. And I thought to myself, I must write this poem, but it took me a while to write it. But eventually I did. And so this is the nipple shield of Achilles, very epic. When Thetis mourns her son before he is dead, she says, I raised him like a tree in a sloping orchard, or maybe I nourished him like a tree, or fattened, cherished, gave strength to, gave suck to. I had a terrible time when I started nursing. Ravaged was the word my chest sang like an epic simile where a beaten donkey keeps destroying crops while the bloodshed rages on. Not only because of the baby's tongue tie, it took 3 lactation consultants to notice, but also they all agreed because of his mother's nipples. My ex used to tease me. They were tiny, platitudes, not obelisks. He'd touch them, we'd tussle, I'd protest my greatness. I almost called him, hey, guess what I need? When I was given a small piece of silicone called a nipple shield. It protected my skin and gave the baby more bulk to suck. Where is the epic poem of childbirth? My friend Ruth has wondered, and just yesterday I heard Madeline Miller ask the same. To help myself heal, I also purchased breast shells, which sounded like something an ocean nymph might wear. Ah me, my sorrow, this bitterness, and the best of childbearing. Thetis is, remember, immortal. I imagine her gliding onto the plain of war to say what no extant epic would have wanted her to say. Put that down, right now. And in reply, I hear Robert Moses in 1950s New York yelling at Jane Jacobs and her opposition to his plan to build a highway through Greenwich Village. There is nobody against this. Nobody, but a bunch of mothers. I'd lick the nipple shield and stick it on, and soon I didn't need it. I'd think of Thetis nursing her gleaming son, a milk-drunk bundle, and her hair floating in the underwater breeze. After all, I am a mammal. This is how I work, how he increases, how I battle my imperfection, his mortality. I'm going to read 2 more poems. The first one is very short, and it is a little love poem to our younger son, Arthur. It's called On His Beauty. His hair smells like a meadow nobody owns. His seed-sized fingernails leave scratch marks on my chest, spelling out the name he had before I delivered him into time. His eyes predict every color of the future except their own. I have seen the shadow of a sparrow fly over his head asleep in the afternoon, so I have seen the world. I nurse him through the night, and at dawn, I eat potato chips. This last poem is called Where the Wolf Tree Nurses, and its last scene takes place during a mass on Holy Thursday, which for anyone who's familiar knows what a solemn mass that is, on the eve of the crucifixion of Christ, and just the kind of place where you want to have a screaming infant. So that is like how that comes into the last scene. But this is kind of a catalog of places where the she in the poem has nursed, and kind of repeats the idea of overlapping a woman's body with the wolf tree, as the book does. So this is the last poem. Where the Wolf Tree Nurses. In David's bridal, you spread out like a canopy, in the bridesmaid's dress when its alterations needed altered. In front of platformed mirrors, you held him, waiting for a seamstress with pins in her lips, and stood a forest, multiplied, a portent in plum for every swan-necked bride. In the 1760s farmhouse at the Henry Ford, the busty, high-collared housewife in a family of reenactors told you to use the parlor, and almost instantly, a tour filled the room and started snapping pictures as if you and he and all your leaves were part of the exhibit. In the DIA's cafe, you sat near the only piece of art the museum invites visitors to touch, a bronze donkey. You imagined him carrying a clear-eyed man into an ancient small town, waving palm fronds. Driving home from the wedding, you parked and carried him into an untended lot of land across from a quarry, empty, unmanned that Sunday. In the huge shade of a gnarled oak by the banks of the Little Tamaki Creek, ants and acorns bit your legs. In the grass down the street from a corner market and bar, where the walls enclosing its back patio are made entirely of old doors, old openings, their colors peeling away in strips. It's one way to build a wall. In your pew during Mass when he was quiet and the latch was easy, leaving Mass when he was fussy and it was hard. In the Gethsemane shrine where three-dimensional disciples drowse on fake rocks, reclined against painted foothills of cedars and olive trees. In the parish hall, mostly empty during services, you sat once nursing and talking with a prostitute who came in for the coffee and donuts. She said her grandchildren lived far away. She smiled at him. It was dark, that same room, one Holy Thursday, the early evening rites you had to leave just as the priest began washing 12 men's feet, the Mass that ends with all the linens folded and its light turns off towards the agony in the garden. Everyone sits quiet in the dark before they leave, in a kind of ceremony that refuses itself. You carried him, crying, into the hall. The security guard unlocked it for you, his gun in a holster on his belt, as always. It was dark and filled to overflowing with Easter flowers, in storage for a few days until the stone would roll away. It was you and the boy, and white tables and chairs, adrift like cottonwood seeds, in the sense, somehow deeper in the dark, of all the blossoms in this world.
Well, I will ask everyone to unmute themselves who wishes and let's have a great round of applause for Katie and her wonderful poetry.
Absolutely wonderful. Terrific. Absolutely wonderful.
Wonderful.
Really a knockout. Wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Impressive, impressive.
Thank you so
Impressive.
much.
Loved it. Loved it.
Yes, thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you so much, Katie. And unfortunately, we'll have a period of comments at the end. But right now, I want to move along. I'm going to mute everyone, but I'm then going to introduce our next reader, who is William Baer, who is a recipient of a Fulbright, a Guggenheim, and a Creative Writing Fellowship in Fiction from the National Endowment for the Arts. He's a graduate of Rutgers, NYU, South Carolina, Johns Hopkins, and USC School of Cinema, where he received the Jack Nicholson Screenwriting Award. He's the author of 30 books, including 6 novels, 2 collections of short stories, and 7 collections of poetry. His novels include the first 3 books in the Jack Colt murder mystery series, the initial book in the Deirdre Flanagan mystery series, Murder in Times Square, all published by Able Muse Press. His most recent novel, which you'll read from today, is Advocatus Diaboli, published by Many Worlds Press, an imprint of Able Muse Press. Please welcome William Baer.
Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate it. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Katie, that was beautiful. And it's not easy to follow. Oh, I'm glad I'm doing fiction today. But anyway, it is great to be here with two talented poets like Katie and Daniel. And of course, I'd like to thank our extraordinary publisher and editor, Alex Pepple, who has done so much for literature over the last 30 or more years. Alex has been kind enough to publish the first of my Catholic-themed novels, Advocatus Diaboli, which is about the canonization case for a nun who lived in Maryland in the mid-20th century. The book was held up earlier by Alex, but I'm going to do it again. I think it's very striking and beautiful. And of course, Alex designed it. So thanks for that also, Alex. The term Advocatus Diaboli, as many of you know, means devil's advocate. And the term originally applied to the person appointed to look into the life of a candidate for sainthood, to see if there was anything that would preclude canonization. Essentially, the devil's advocate was someone looking to dig up dirt. Although the term is no longer officially used, the process remains essentially the same. In the novel, which is set a couple of years ago in 2020, Robbie Rankin, a Georgetown professor, reluctantly agrees to serve as the devil's advocate in the ongoing case of Sister Adelaide Bruckner, who died in 1972. In delving into her life, Robbie crosses paths with Erin Montgomery, a relentless journalist who's looking into the 1964 suicide of her grandfather, Senator Wallace Montgomery. There are serious concerns that the young Adelaide, when she was working on the Hill as an intern, was somehow involved in the senator's death. So this afternoon, I'll read the opening two chapters. The first chapter is an interview conducted by Robbie about a possible miracle. And the second chapter is an interview conducted by Erin about the death of her grandfather. The book itself, which includes several other interviews, is Robbie's final case report for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. A few notes about the first two chapters. The process of canonization is basically in three stages. First, the candidate is designated venerable, and that term will pop up. In the second stage, the person is referred to as blessed, and the third stage is sainthood. In the first chapter, there's a reference to a holy card. And I'd like to show you one just in case you're not familiar with them. They're about that size. They usually have a picture of a saint on the front or a blessed, and then it's a prayer of some kind on the back. If the person is still a blessed, often the prayer on the back, as in this case, is a prayer for their eventual sainthood. And then lastly, chapter 2 refers to the MPD, which is the abbreviation for Washington, D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department. Advocatus Diaboli, chapter 1, MedStar Georgetown. Tonight. That's all he said? Yes. When I asked him if my baby was going to die, he said, tonight. And I felt the inner essence of myself flush away from my body, and I collapsed into the wheelchair in the dim whiteness of the hospital room, the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, right next to Christopher's incubator. I don't think he meant to be mean or inconsiderate. He just answered my question. I guess he wanted me to be prepared for what was coming soon, within hours. Should I call a nurse, he asked. I shook my head no, and he left me alone. It's hard to describe how I felt. My child was in extremis, and so was I. Within an excruciating emptiness, within an all-encompassing aloneness, as if the world was dead around me, as if I was dead myself, as if God was dead. I'm sorry, but it's hard. I understand. Ask me whatever you want. How did the doctor describe Christopher's condition? His lung collapsed a few hours after birth, which led to bleeding in the brain, IVH, intraventricular hemorrhage, which led to sepsis and meningitis, all within a few hours, which made no sense. Kit was essentially full term, and there'd never been any birth problems in my family history, at least as far as I know. It seemed perfectly inexplicable, but I guess things like that always seem inexplicable. What happened next? I stood up and looked down at my dying baby, wired with leads, lines, IVs, probes, and tubes, all worthless. I should have been talking to him, comforting him as the nurses suggested, softly, calmly, or singing or humming, but I was wordless, soundless. I took off my right glove and placed my forefinger into his tiny hand, and I could feel him holding on to me desperately, which made things even worse. For some reason, I thought of Yeats, The Claws of Heaven. I have spread my dreams under my feet. Tread softly because you tread on my dreams, which made no sense. I stood there for a while, still weak from giving birth, numb with the rank presence of death lurking in the sterile room. Eventually, a nurse came over and suggested I should go back to my bed and rest. After all, about 10 hours earlier, I'd given birth to my one and only child, and the nurse was worried about me as well. She was a very kind woman, compassionate and silent. Her name was Ellen. I remember that she had a small golden cross around her neck. She helped me out of my ICU gown as I took off my mask and my other glove. Then she wheeled me away down a silent corridor. In the dark of night, I was thinking about her little golden cross. Please take me to the chapel. She hesitated, but then she did take me to the chapel. As we entered the empty room, her beeper beeped. I'll be right back, she said. When she was gone, I stood up and walked to the front pew on the left and stared moronically at the large crucifix, at the suffering Jesus. I felt nothing. Once again, Yeats invaded my thoughts. Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by. Lines from under Ben Bulben, written by Yeats when he was dying, maybe even his last poem. Once again, it was inexplicable. I'd once taken a course in Yeats's poetry at St. Mary's College, but I'd never fully understood that particular poem or its final lines. Surely I should be praying, but prayers to whom? To the Father, to the Son, to the Virgin, to some saint? Then I looked down at the wooden pew and realized that my right hand was resting on a little holy card. I picked it up. There was a picture of a pretty young nun on one side and a prayer to Venerable Adelaide on the back. It was one of those plastic-covered cards, and in the lower left-hand corner on the back, there was a tiny relic encased within the plastic. I'd been raised Catholic, but I didn't know the exact significance of the word venerable or the exact distinctions between the various classes of relics, but I could clearly see that the little relic was a tiny square of cloth, maybe from the nun's clothing, maybe from her habit. Without thinking about it, I stood up and found my way back to my room, opened my pocketbook, and used my scissors to cut open the holy card and remove the little piece of cloth. Then I went back down the corridors to the NICU, a bit unsteadily. Then I put on another ICU gown, washed my hands with antibacterial soap, put on another mask and gloves, then went inside to see my dying son, who looked dead, almost grayish. But I could see his little chest rise and fall almost imperceptibly with each labored breath, as if the struggle was almost over. Then I took the glove off my right hand, placed the little piece of cloth on the tip of my index finger, and pressed it gently against my child's mouth, on his lips. Then I prayed to Venerable Adelaide, or whoever she was, to cure my dying baby, repeating over and over, please cure my little baby, please cure my baby, please cure my baby. Which she did, which happened. Kit's color came back gradually, and he opened his eyes, and he cried like a healthy baby. I called for the nurse, and I fell to my knees. What did the doctor say? He checked the monitors, ran a few tests, and moved Kit into the neonatal unit with the healthy babies. The bleeding was gone, the sepsis was gone, the meningitis was gone. What did he say? Not much. but he was pleased with what had happened. Did he believe it was a miracle? I don't know. I only saw Dr. Sorrell one more time after Kit was moved out of the NICU. Did the nurse, Ellen, believe it was a miracle? Yes, all the nurses did. The impossible had happened, and there was no denying it. Given Christopher's collapsed lung, why wasn't he on a ventilator? I don't know. Did you ever wonder about it? No. The date was December 16, 2019. Were you aware that that was the feast day of St. Adelaide of Burgundy, a medieval saint? No, I'd never heard of her. I was praying to the young nun on the holy card, Venerable Adelaide Bruckner, a 20th century nun from Maryland. Notes. Date of the incident, Sunday, December 16, 2019. Time, 11:50 p.m. Approximate place, MedStar Georgetown Hospital, Reservoir Road, Northwest. Attending Dr. Mark Sorrell, MD. Attending nurse, Ellen Roberts. Time of birth, 11:52 a.m. Child, Christopher Kit Yates. Mother, Veronica Ronnie Yates. Veronica Yates, age 23, both now and at the time of the alleged miracle. A single mother born and raised in her father's modest home, mother deceased, near Cove Point, Maryland on the Chesapeake, where she still lives with her father and her child, Christopher, almost 5 months. Veronica has been raised Catholic. She claims to have been an academically disinterested student in high school, much more interested in athletics, particularly track, specifically the 200 and 400 meter hurdles. Eventually, she commuted to Prince George's Community College, became more serious academically, was awarded a scholarship to nearby St. Mary's College in St. Mary's City, 12 miles away. Commutes, an education major. Phi Beta Kappa at graduation, engaged to her high school sweetheart, Theodore Teddy Taylor. When she becomes pregnant, he insists that she abort the child. When Veronica refuses, he abandons her. The child is born on December 16, 2019, and the alleged miracle takes place that evening. She's currently on leave from her position as a preschool teacher at John Carroll Academy in Lusby, Maryland. Impressions of the witness. Veronica Yates seems to be a thoughtful young woman, highly likable and a loving mother. She seems stable, not given to fantasy, both honest and practical. Robert Rankin, transcribed 5/13/20. Chapter 2, Dirksen Office Building. What time did you enter the office? Why? You know why, just answer the question. It was around 3:15. Why? We needed to go over something. I think it was a rider of the farm subsidy bill, something like that. Was he alone? Yes. Did you see anyone coming or going? No, he'd already sent his secretary home. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and the building was emptied out for the weekend. What did you see? You know what I saw, Erin. Tell me. The senator was slumped back in his office couch. There was blood at his chest, and his Colt revolver was lying on the floor at his feet. It was obvious that he'd shot himself through the chest into the heart. Since it was also clear that the senator was dead, I called Lloyd Fremont. His Secret Service primary? Correct. Not MPD? I let Lloyd handle everything. I left the room, went to my office, and stared at the wall. It was hard to comprehend, extremely difficult. Did you know he kept a Colt Python in his office? Yes. Did the staff know about the weapon? Yes. Did you ever doubt that it was a suicide? No, of course not. Why do you think he committed suicide? I have no idea, Erin. What's this all about anyway? It's ancient history. Are you writing another book? I'm thinking about it. My grandmother doesn't believe it was suicide. Wives seldom do. Did Fremont and the Secret Service have any suspicions? Of course not. Never. Look, Erin, the only reason I agreed to meet with you was as a courtesy to your grandmother, whom I've always admired, as did everyone else. But I can't see what digging around into the senator's death could possibly accomplish. It was 56 years ago. I know how many years have passed. Look at this photograph, Miguel. Who is it? Where did this come from? It's from the Senate archives. How did you get into those files? FOIA. It was approved yesterday. Just look at the photograph, Miguel. Who is it? I don't know. Turn it over and read it. It says Adele. Who's that? He's shown a Xerox of the senator's calendar for Friday, April 10th, 1964. Read the last entry on my grandfather's calendar at 3 o'clock. Adelaide. Who's Adelaide? Probably one of the interns. The one who became a nun? Maybe. Let's be clear about something, Miguel. If you're covering up something that's important to my family, I will nail your ass to the Dirksen statue. Look, Aaron, I admired your grandfather and I admire your grandmother, but I know nothing more than what I've already told you. What I told the Secret Service back then, what I told MPD. Senator Montgomery, for some inexplicable reason, took his own life, and I was the one who found him. And I've been haunted by it ever since for 56 years. Did you see Adelaide that day? I did not. Did you see anyone? No. I think you're lying, Miguel. He stands up. That's enough, Aaron. He leaves the conference room. Notes. Miguel Diaz is an 84-year-old retired lobbyist from New Mexico. In 1964, he was the senator's hotshot young aide, 28 years old, a Yale Law grad, reputed as cocky and always on the move, until the death of Senator Wallace Montgomery in his office, room 359 in the Dirksen Senate office building on April 10, 1964. By all accounts, Diaz was never the same, serving as a rather anonymous farm and ranch lobbyist for most of his adult life. He seems like a total loser to me, and a liar. Aaron Montgomery, transcribed 6/15/20. And that's the end of chapter 2. I thank you all very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'd like to invite everyone who wishes to unmute yourselves for a round of applause for William and his wonderful reading.
Absolutely nice. Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Yes, compelling and well read. Thank you so much, Bill. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody again, and we will go to our next reader and final reader today is Daniel Galef, whose poetry ranges from comic verse, Light Quarterly, the Saturday Evening Post, the Washington Post, Style International, to children's literature, Spider, Caterpillars, School Magazine, and serious formal poetry, Able Muse, Atlanta Review, The Lyric. His first book, Imaginary Sonnets, is a collection of persona poems from the point of view of historical figures, literary characters, and even intimate objects. Besides poems, he also writes fiction. Indiana Review, Jute, the Best Small Fictions Anthology, Nonfiction, Wordways, Working Classicists, the Journal of Compressed Creative Arts, and Humor, American Bystander, NationalLampoon.com, the Journal of Reproducible Results, wow, and just this week started the graduate program at the University of Cincinnati. Please welcome Daniel.
Thank you very much. Also, extremely hard to follow. My initial set list for this did not include any religious or mythological poems, but given the reading, I've just shuffled some things around. So let's see if I can make this work. So yeah, these are all going to be sonnets from my first book with Able Muse and with Alex called Imaginary Sonnets. I usually write short things and did not have the patience for a book-length series of any kind until I realized I could do persona poems and make every poem a different voice and a different style. And that way, I wouldn't have to have any kind of patience or discipline. So in 2016, I found this incredible collection by a Victorian poet called Eugene Lee Hamilton. I took the name and the premise, just 70 poems from the point of view of 70 different historical figures and literary characters and mythological characters. And I'll start with one that was published in Able Muse a couple of years ago. called Penelope to the Shuttle of Her Loom. And if everyone knows the story of Penelope in the Odyssey, one of the ploys by which she staves off the suitors, the boorish suitors staying in her house, is that she weaves a burial shroud for her father-in-law, who's alive, by the way, which is weird, and then every day unravels the work so that it'll never be finished and she can keep going. Your world is small, my shuttle, just this loom, just warp and weft within one tiny room. Yet what I'd give to fly as free as you, glide backwards, swift as forwards, not to keep this tangled ruse, but what more could I do? Unspin the thread, unshear the wool, unsheep the very sheep. I know this woe's not new. To not forge forwards, quite a different curse. Would that I might escape from this too staid stasis, weaving and weaving in reverse. Beyond this room, out past the straying yew, the hearthless sea hides some small islet, at which I could plant my distaff, and all who saw it would say, "What kind of oar is that?" So about half the fun of this series was trying to mimic the very sort of florid and overwrought Victorian sonnet style that I really came to love in Lee Hamilton. But also, it's just full of a bunch of little puns and formatting quirks. So for this poem, you probably knows it started with a sonnet. It's a couplet. The sonnet's written in reverse. Couplet at the beginning, quatrains at the end. Most of the poems in the book have footnotes. So I wanted to write about more sort of obscure historical figures or things that would take a little background, just because my favorite part of reading is getting sent down a Wikipedia rabbit hole. So this one I came across in a biography of the French post-impressionist composer Eric Satie. A friend of his called George Auriol was a patron, a regular at the bar in the Chat Noir Cabaret in Paris. And in 1887, the cabaret was filled with all of these small pieces of art and tchotchkes and sculptures, mostly just worthless nonsense. But George Auriol, a humorist, decided to write a fictional museum guide giving fake histories, great tales of provenance, the eminent figures who had gifted the artworks for every piece in it. So this one is called George Auriol to a patron at the Chat Noir. Come in, here, have a glass of beer. The best in France, so says the Pope, you know. I'll seat you where he sits when he sups here, beneath these poker-playing dogs. Van Gogh. Don't touch, the paint is fresh. I knew the model. Lovely gal. Alsatian, I recall. Her only vice, a weakness for the bottle. Poor dear. Not drink, the bottle, that was all. These cups were looted from the sack of Troy aboard the pirate Pinkbeard's 12-mast scow. Our beer, which I can see you quite enjoy, is brewed by tight-lipped monks who take a vow never to speak a lie. I, as a boy, was in the order. I have left it now. I am fascinated by liars and frauds. Has anyone seen Inventing Anna, the show, or that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio as Frank Abagnale, based on a fantastic memoir of a check-kiting criminal? And I just got my degree earlier this summer in lies. It says fiction on the piece of paper, but if you look up fiction in the dictionary, that's just another word for lies. All writers are liars. Here is a sonnet I read at my graduation reading that I think at least some of my professors thought was meant to be about them, but I swear it wasn't. All but one of them were wrong. It's called The Great Poet. To call him Orphic would be a misnomer. He moves not stones, but great men's loyalties. They call him Bard Reborn and Second Homer, and God knows how he lives on royalties. His verse is a reflection of the world. No, the world itself reflects what he has written. To view his tapestry of words unfurled is then to be immediately smitten. His latest covers cluttered with awards. They speculate like buboes on a body. The critics, oddly, and the unwashed hordes for once agree. He's smart, but never snotty. Anthologies and textbooks all demand him. So why is it that I can't fucking stand him? It wasn't about anyone. That was published in Measure like 7 years ago. But I tell people it could be about them, and it puts them on edge a little bit. And of course, everyone wants to be that writer too. The more popular something is, the more hated it also is. The worst response to any poetry book, which is a response to almost all poetry books, is apathy. And this next poem, I think, was excerpted from a longer poem. I sonetized it. And then it's Andalusia to Ampetto, based on two characters in Fortunatus legend, which one of the first novels, sort of a medieval picaresque thing, where he finds this magic purse and becomes from peasant to an eminent famous figure. This is about being famous. You'll think yourself a marble bust, you're slate. In every creep and critic is a sponge who, with a single swipe across your pate, remakes it as their own, so they can lunge full tilt at wheeling windmills with your voice and knock them over, pin the crime on you, and leave you limp with little other choice but shrug and laugh. What are you going to do? This gruesome sport is Fortune's favorite game. She steals your soul, that mindless, worshipped elf, until all that remains, an empty name that rests uncut, gilt-edged upon the shelf. Thus I've heard sung the crippling curse of fame. But, still I'd like to find out for myself. And it is dangerous to start writing about writing because it is too easy and people will call you out on it. But then there are sort of workarounds that you can also recognize. And I am pretty sure that whenever, or most of the time, when writers write about painters, I think that's a secret stand-in. There's a fantastic story by Balzac called The Lost Masterpiece, which is about a genius painter who can't get his thoughts across on the canvas. And it's really clearly about a great writer who can't get his thoughts across on the page. But they're not the same thing. The different genres have different problems. And one thing I've always liked is when people, writers especially, say, this is where I got that. This is where I took this from, which is a great line and sort of literal and sort of not literal. And so this one's just called Portrait. I painted you a portrait, and I took your golden hair, cliche, I know, all right, from yonder golden meadow. If you look there now, you'll see the wheat's dishwater white. That hue was wasted there. Your shell-like ear, a shell. I plucked it off some crabby beach with just one brushstroke. Oh, but do not fear. I hear crabs share their shed shells, each to each. Those stars within your eyes were stars I stole from where all stars are. Sure, it was a Shonda some sailors died, but perhaps the lightless hole in the heavens great astrologers can ponder. And the life in your expression, well, only I could feel that, love. I guess that means goodbye. I think that would be a sort of justice if every time you took an image or a line from somewhere else, it stopped being there, because that's what taking is. It's not taking if it's still there when you get done with it. At least that's what my students say when they're discovered with plagiarized works. And then the last painting poem in here, I tried pretty hard to keep all of the subjects dead. I didn't want to deal with any defamation lawsuits. And a lot of the stories that I was writing about are things from like classic literature or mythology or ancient history. This one is, I think, the only subject in the poem who's alive. If anyone remembers, this was about 10 years ago. Cecilia Ximenez. She was a Spanish painter who painted over a mural of Christ on the wall of a church in Spain. And did so really, really badly. It became probably a lot more prominent than it should have. I'm going to put a link to Google Images in the chat because that's the kind of thing you can do in a remote reading. It went viral. There was an SNL sketch where she was played by Kate McKinnon, and it was extremely funny, but it was also somewhat cruel because this was, in essence, an act of devotion. She did not understand in the interviews afterwards why it should be a bad thing for her to have taken her time and her effort and painted this picture of the Lord on the wall of the church to fix the old one, no matter how good or bad it was. And it reminded me of a really nice line in Edward Gibbon about the difference between the ancient Greek and Roman ideas of aesthetics and the Christian ones, which is that it doesn't matter how well you sing the Mass. It doesn't matter if you're in tune. The point is not being good. God isn't a critic. And so this is Cecilia Ximenez addresses the Virgin of Mercy, which is what she says inspired the painting. We've both produced a Christ. Yours was of flesh and mine of mural plaster. Both predate our pure conception. Frescoes must be fresh, but light and life are old. All art came late. The fallacy of Zeuxis and Prassius was thinking that the Lord demands good taste. But as long as we are modest, kind, and chaste, then heaven takes our prayers. Adios gracias. Who cares just how in tune a psalm is sung? How clear the voice, or if you keep good time? The spirit's in the heart, and not the tongue. All art is recreation. On wet lime, like on the skin of water, we can limn, and if we mean it, it will be a hymn. So they're not all meant to be funny, although that one's based on a funny situation. Some of these are really serious treatments. Here's a poem about a taco. So there's a podcast I listen to where one of the segments is making fun of corporate public press releases and the language they use in corporate press releases. And they read one that was Taco Bell announcing a new taco where instead of a tortilla, it was wrapped in a sort of compressed patty of chicken. So it was just made of chicken. And then a few years later, they came out with a new breakfast taco where the shell was a fried egg. These are very interesting times we live in. And so this is the Taco Bell egg taco addresses the Taco Bell chicken chalupa. Now who comes first? That's right. I'll wager that the pecking order's changed. No more to wait, to be a dormant form. No more my fate to plumb potentiality. For what is life all in one basket? Today I feel a newfound purpose in a newfound form. The early bird, I've heard told, gets the worm, and breakfast is the most important meal. Is the sky falling? Or is it clear at last? What's that, Abraxas? Is your eon through? Let ousted archons rest unserved in hell, while Orphic totems reign a new repast. I contain not just my shelf, but am a shell, and shellless. Hail, new morning, I am new. And that's very much what I think a taco would say if a taco were a devotee of ancient Persian Mithraic cults and also were sentient. I've not had this taco, and I don't think I'm going to have this taco. If anyone does, please let me know how it is. And let's see. So some of the humor just comes from treating a ridiculous situation very seriously. And some of it is the opposite, treating a serious situation ridiculously. And then sometimes you just write a poem for the sake of a rhyme. Here we go. This was one of the fun parts of this was trying to find places other than literary journals to publish them. So if it was about a scientist, like you could find a scientific journal that might take it. A legal journal published one about an ancient Roman jurist. This one was published in the Journal of Humanistic Mathematics, and it's called One Straight Line Talks to Another Straight Line, Traveling in the Same Direction Across an Infinite Plane. We'll never meet, my love, we're parallel, and cursed to range across our fated file, parted by an inch or by an ell, as totally as by a statute mile. If this flat plane were spheric, we might bend and cross our paths. You'd make a prime meridian. But space cannot protract, my breathless friend, the laws that bind us, moral or Euclidean. I'd wish that we ourselves could bend, could curve, but fear, what if we curved, but not by much? And then so close, with one Lucretian swerve, we'd near and near and near, but never touch. a hopeless quest, eternal and quixotic, your form just out of reach, love asymptotic. And then a couple were published in a philosophy journal, Philosophy Now, which I like. I'm going to see if some of these I have to disguise as being imaginary sonnets. They get other titles without any speakers whatsoever. This one just comes from the phrase, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," which is a great phrase, but then what if a philosophical utilitarianist read it? John Stuart Mill or Bentham, where what don't consequences matter? What about consequentialism? What if you had good intentions and a bad result? Which is the point, but what if you had bad intentions and a good result? Does that absolve you? I think I put it in the mouth of Wernher von Braun, who was the Nazi rocket scientist who was recruited to sort of start the US space program with Operation Paperclip. But really, anyone who wants to point at that intentions don't matter could point to this. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but what of the reverse? Just like some unexpectedly benevolent inventions, the hug bomb or the penicillin gun, ill will can double-cross itself. A power of wild destruction, terrible and terrific, like spoiled wine into water, could unsour, begrudgingly prove utile, optimithic. The steps to heaven glint with evil glamour, salvation being merely an award for those whose stoking fires of Götterdammerung before the raging forge grew bored, until they, fumbling blindly with a hammer, banged a plowshare from a bungled sword. I forget how many of these were just opportunities to use words. There's that great utilitarian jargon in there, the words that sound like they're misspelled. They have to keep telling spell check not to change. Utile and optimific. And you've probably noticed that I'm not really making any attempt to put any of these into the actual voice of the people that they're about. It's more about imagining the situations and the frame of mind you'd have to be in that person's situation. I don't think Wernher von Braun ever really spoke like this. The only way I know he spoke is from the Tom Lehrer song about him, where he says, "Don't say that I'm hypocritical, but merely that I'm apolitical." I guess to be really realistic, I would have to have written the sonnet in German. But I don't know German. So instead, I wrote this other sonnet in German. Wenn ging der Schwoll und wann ab Schwoll es geht, man klug bewann zu glieben an dem Wies und weder nach ein Paar zu sausen hieß. Komm nicht der Schwan, sich noch beträumen heit. Betraume, blickt versiegt die Hummelt an, wo gleich den Öser krägt mit Storb und Foh, aus Bremischhupfen klängelt als der Gahn und schrock der Zischerwort zu saften wo. Ertreulichen vergreitig, Arkischen wie totisch Kannings in der Kräuber Grott. Tipp Grabei treppisch, wären upper Blott am Schmock die Zappen. Alles von hieß wenn. Wie auf dem Bleck vom Meer und ihn geschwün, kennst du das Land, wo die Zitronen blühen. That's around an opening line of Goethe's, and the rest is complete gibberish. I've read that at readings for a German society where they did not realize. I think if you go fast enough and confident enough is the trick. I am a huge fan of nonsense. Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll, Danny Kaye speaking in fake French to a French waiter. But I'm also interested in sense. And that was, I think, also in that philosophic journal. And another poem in the philosophic journal it was from the view of Parmenides, who is one of the first philosophers we've got, one of the pre-Socratics, and one of the first people to talk really rigorously about sense, even though pretty much everything he ever wrote is lost. And this is also, like the von Braun one, based on just taking a closer look at a line that sounds good, but maybe you want to take a closer look at. So in this case, is Parmenides hears a line and addresses the singer Doris Day. What? What will be, will be. But what will be, but what will be? What won't be? No, siree. And for what will not be, you see. And what will be do, if not be? See, what is not what is, and nor is what is not. Or is it? For what is not seems, and what seems not, or at least seems not to be. What seems not, nor is either, isn't. Although not all that seems not is not, nor all that which doesn't. Dreams are and or not. Like shades or sunlit beams which aren't and are. A paradox, it seems. And paradoxically, quite clear, I think. Or think I do. Zeno, pour me half a drink. Let's see. All right. After finishing the manuscript for this about 3 years ago, I thought that I would never read or write another sonnet again. And then last winter, as Alex can attest, was the grueling process of copy editing, and I had to read everything over again 5 or 10 times and go back and forth about individual commas. And somehow I started writing sonnets again. So here are some sonnets that aren't in the book. Here is one that comes from a viral tweet I saw that I've still not really been able to answer. It was, I think, Mike Ginn. I don't remember his Twitter handle, but it just devastated the world of literature, from which I still don't think it has recovered. And it just said, "All right, poets, we get it. Things are like other things." So this is called Poets Speak of the Night. Night is a nest. It is the starry mirror of waters which a rippling world reflects. It whispers prayers in long dead dialects. It breathes upon the glass and makes it clearer. Uncounted stars, the sand on night-washed shores sift softly, grinding over gloom-gripped lands in silence, swaddled, bound in winding bands of stillness like a gauze. All nights are whores. Night takes the ghost of life, the time, the toil, in payment for the ghost of death it grants. No, night is a bowl of bronze, a crawl with ants of gold. Night is a spit. Night is an eye. Night is a garden fed with graveyard soil, where metaphors, like mushrooms, multiply. And then here is another. One of the poems in the book I didn't get to read was from the point of view of Thales, another pre-Socratic poet, and the subject, a pre-Socratic philosopher, and the subject of one of Aesop's fables, the philosopher who fell down the well. He was looking up at the stars and wasn't looking where he was walking. And in this one, I've got sort of the response to that. When I was reading about wells, I do lots of research. I read about wells for the well poem. There's an old myth that says if you look down into a well in the middle of the day, you can see the stars because the light gets polarized and all the scattering from the sun, you can see right through it. This is a myth, but it's a fantastic myth for a poem. But also, why should all the poems about myths accept myths and be romantic and wide-eyed? And this is a rationalist addresses someone who has fallen down a well. And it was just published. After publishing a lot of these in religious journals, I figured at one I deserves, just one gets to go to a rationalist journal. And this got sold to a place I think called Free Inquiry. A rationalist addresses someone at the bottom of a well. Yes, one sees stars at the bottom of a well, but they are lies. The constellations there are not the ones through leagues of felted air and crystal spheres, nor ghosts of stars that fell in ages past, nor are they devil's eyes, or salamanders' droppings, or bright gems that gnomes have mined and polished, or the stems of subterranean fruits that sorcerers prize for properties obscure. They're just some gleams from damp, slick rocks, or maybe coins chucked down by other fools, and further fools who spy there some specious specks are duly duped and drown. Don't think me rude, there's nothing wrong with dreams, but you won't catch me jumping down there either. And I believe that is my time, unless people want another funny one or another not funny one.
Oh,
I think that's
sure.
good. All right, here is another mythological one to close out. Like a lot of people, I am a night writer. Always had some insomnia, and a lot of these were written somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, which is fantastic now that I'm teaching at 8 a.m. So this one, it's Tinthu from a figure that we keep finding on the back of Etruscan bronze mirrors. And he's sort of a prototype of Tithonus, but without the baggage of the Greek myth and the Tennyson poem about eternal youth. Here he's just a lover of the dawn. The Etruscan dawn goddess is Tisana, and she apparently had a cult that was sort of still around in the 1800s as a fairy or a folk saint prayed to by insomniacs. This is a serious one, sorry. Why is it that the smallest hours are longest, when all is still and silent, and the mind is loud, and its pronouncements are the strongest, most passionate, and of the cruelest kind? Those lowest numbered hours, by darkness muffled, like lifetimes pass, and leave the world changed, like lifetimes will. Familiar thoughts are shuffled, in new and alien patterns rearranged, while the highest numbered years flit by like sparrows through a hall and out the other side. But instants, frozen like the flight of arrows, stand swift, stick still, suspended, petrified, as if the narrow neck of time's glass narrows before the final grain has danced and died. I should have ended on a funny one. Oh well.
Well, you ended in quite an impressive one, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
So much for your reading. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And I'm going to unmute everyone and ask for applause for Daniel and all of our readers today. And
That was wonderful. That was absolutely.
oops. Let me see.
I think you muted everyone instead of unmuting everyone.
Yes.
Did I? Okay. Well, unmute. I see mute all. Let's see if I can.
You can't unmute everyone.
Oh, they have to unmute yourselves. Excuse me. And give a round of applause.
That was great. That was terrific.
Fabulous.
That was
Fabulous.
That was great. Very nice.
Tremendous talent. Tremendous talent here.
Very nice.
Incredible erudition and skill and wonderful subjects. Well treated, I thought. Interesting topics and the themes of religion following through all of the readers. Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to share to the group?
I'd like to say how much I love Casey at the bat. And Daniel, I want to congratulate you. I wrote it out as the other, whatever form the original is in, and I am so impressed. I write formal stuff, and somebody who can pull that off, you have my vote. What can I say? You got me with Casey at the bat. And if anybody hasn't seen Casey at the bat, go look and then type it up for yourself and admire what this guy pulled off.
Can you read Casey at the bat?
I'm sorry, it's actually Casey to his bat. I forget about the persona trick, but it's Casey to his bat. And formally speaking, it's a miracle. Maybe we'll make Daniel a saint. I think that poem is, I've never seen anybody do it before. Maybe they do it all the time. Maybe Tennyson did it in his sleep, but I've never seen it. 2 forms in 1 poem, 2 complete, well done forms in 1 poem.
Daniel, can you grace us?
I think I've used up my time. I could read Casey at the Bat. That's the first poem I ever memorized back in middle school, but it's a bit longer.
I'm for
The
that.
trick is what you did with it.
I think I invented this. I think other people have done similar things in the past. George Simmers, the editor of Snakeskin, also a great formalist journal, sometimes formalist, also does other things, told me that the French surrealist Louis Aragon wrote some very short poems that had 2 different rhyme schemes and 2 different meters.
Yeah, but they're in French.
Yeah, so this is I think it's the first one that exists. I would love if other people took up the thread and wrote their own. It's a convertible sonnet. So it is a sonnet in one reading, but also if you relineate it, it is a ballad in like alternating 4/3, 4/3, and all of the rhymes still work. It has new rhymes that become evident. It took a lot of graphs to write, as all the best poems do.
Well, I think you are a candidate for at least venerability.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that sonnet or that ballad.
Anybody else? Actually, I'd like to make a comment to William Baer that for your work, that what you read and what I read in the pre-release, you did what the best fiction writers do, which is to open a door on what is complete, contained, and compelling. It's a whole world that I was completely ignorant of. I mean, I was raised as a Quaker, for heaven's sakes. And in the case of belief, how belief and faith intersects in this legalistic inquiry into the nature of miracle and sainthood, just made me believe that I was in that world. And it was compelling and, as I said, completely believable. And as I said, that's what the best fiction writers pull off. And I certainly want to read more. I read some of it, of course. I've been preparing for this broadcast. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, or.
Well, I would say that I was very fortunate that that holy card that I held up earlier, this woman is a blessed now. She's from New Jersey, Teresa Damjanovic, and her canonization process is going on. She was born in 1901, 1927. And when I was in high school, I went to DePaul Diocesan High School, and it was Sisters of Charity. Well, it turns out that she was a Sister of Charity, and the postulator, which is the representative for the cause in the United States, is one of the Sisters of Charity. So I contacted her. Her name was Sister Mary Canavan, and I went down to Convent Station, where they live in Jersey, and she's in her 80s. She had been the former Mother Superior of the house, and she knew this stuff backwards and forwards. So I had a million questions, and she was marvelous. And so if I got anything right, she played a role in it. So thank you for saying that, Rob.
Oh, you're quite welcome. It was wonderful, as I said, to be in that world, that I think the best fiction writers do. There's a great quote by Borges where he's quoting Novalis, where he says that, we create a world around us, and but I think and we give it texture and sight and sound, but we allow tenuous crevices of irrationality to show us that it's false. And I think, when we're in that mode where we're reading a wonderful poem or good fiction, we need a little irrationality in there. And I think the sort of strangeness for me of this new world was a wonderful experience. Anybody else want to speak? Certainly there are a lot of comments in the chat box. Wonderful comments from the audience.
I would like to connect what Daniel said, something he said about poets are liars. Is that correct, Daniel? And
if I say yes, how would you believe me?
We'll have to discuss that sometime. Okay. But Bill Baer is saying that it's fiction, but I'm connecting that to it's a lie. And you're talking about these cracks of irrationality. And yet the yin yangness of it is that the lies turn out to at least have truth. And in fact, we can't access those truths without going through lies, if I may dare say that.
Isn't that the Picasso thing? I'm not a big Picasso fan, but wasn't he the first one to say that art is a lie that tells the truth? And it's many people have quoted it again, and here I am doing it. So,
well, we made it up ourselves. I think we can take credit. We found that our way to that ourselves. This group.
Yeah, there's a great quote that when William Glackens was buying Picassos for William Barnes, whose museum is right down the road from me, he was told that a Picasso that he bought was fake, and he asked Picasso, "Is that Cubist painting?" And Picasso said, "All of my paintings are fakes." I love that line.
Plato, of course, excluded poets from his Republic because they were liars. Quite a literalist.
Yes.
People wouldn't be able to distinguish truth from lies because of poetry and particularly dramatists. Yes, yes.
I also think
There's a wonderful reading of that, The Republic, though, where it's a satire, and that Plato actually respects, the poets the most, and he's like, wouldn't it be ridiculous if we actually said this? There's wonderful ways classicists have read it as sort of Plato's The Playwright's satire. Just wanted to throw that in there too, to complicate things even more.
I think that Plato excluded the poets on account of their unreliability. He thought that they could not be relied upon in politics. And he was more interested in politics than anything else, you see.
Sort of a species of sophistry. So many of the dialogues are about the danger of the sophists and how philosophy is distinct from sophistry. And if you can write something that is attractive and persuasive without necessarily being true, like poetry can be, isn't that a kind of bad faith arguing? And I don't think there's really a way around that. I just think it gives a lot more benefit than harm.
Doesn't it mean we have to grow up?
No, that means that we have to trust words more than we do, because words are an invention. They don't exist. They're invented artifacts, you see. So
yes, but they invent us.
Invented.
They invent us. After they were invented, we could also say they invent us.
Yes, because
most of my research is looking up what a word originally meant.
Yes, exactly, the etymology. But the problem is, this is the paradox. The more fictionalized they are, the more we believe in them, because this is the only means that we have of communication. Even despite the shortcomings, you see, we don't have anything else.
I think we're drifting into philosophy, and we may never end. So I would like to say that if no one has any more to say today, I want to say how honored I am to be hosting this to these three wonderful writers, and how grateful I am to all three that they took their time, not just to be with us today, but to create these worlds that they've given us. And Katie, just wonderful work. Bill, I always enjoy your work tremendously, and I'm glad to have met and been able to get to know a little bit Daniel and his incredible erudition and playfulness, and just wonderful. So with that, I think we can close off unless anyone has a last word.
Am I on mute?
Yes, you're on.
Oh, I would just like to say this in terms of Daniel, about the lies, right? Lies. I love the irrationality to reveal the truth. I love that disjunction. It's like I think I love film, foreign film mostly, but next weekend, one of the theaters here is bringing back a lot of classics. And I'm thinking one of them I'm seeing is Apocalypse Now, but it's like it's been remastered, 70 millimeter. I'm seeing A Space Odyssey. Now, this didn't happen. Kubrick just imagined, and Coppola, but it is a truth. And I think when we walk out of the theater, that is true. It's like Tarkovsky with the mirror. Any one of Andrei Tarkovsky's films, that Russian director, he to me is, Bergman said everything I know about film I learned from Andrei. Andrei was never always in the real world. I mean, he would have a woman on a bed and suddenly she's floating above the bed. You accept it. In his film, you accept his truth. I just want to say that. I love the irrational.
Thanks so much. But with that irrational thoughts and those wonderful images from Tchaikovsky, the son of a poet, by the way, maybe we can close off and say goodbye. So once again, thank you for all coming. Thanks to our readers and thanks to our audience. It's been an honor.
And thank you, Rob, for such a masterful hosting job. And thank you to our readers again. Thank you, Daniel, Bill, and Katie. It was a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. And I
Thank
should
you
have
all.
the recording for the event in a couple of days or so. So look for it.